it's pro-marriage, and it's pro-love according to God's plan. Now, to be pro-marriage and pro-love according to God's plan means to be opposed to everything that's against that. You know, they characterize us as anti-gay. But if you strongly believe that something is true, of course you think the opposite is false. They're the same way. Why aren't they characterized as anti-whatever we are, right? But that's not how it ever goes in the media. We're always the anti-this. We're anti-this. We're anti-that. Well, everyone's anti-something, right? If you believe something, it also means you're against the opposite. And everyone's that way. So it's not just Catholics, it's everybody is that way. But it's not particularly homosexuality we're against. We're against any expression of sexual love outside of natural marriage. And any expression of sexual love that isn't itself ordered to be bringing new life into the world, right? So we're against fornication. We're against contraception. We're against unnatural acts between men and women. We're against unnatural acts between men and women and women. Any use of the sexual powers that isn't of itself ordained to bringing about new life, at least that is open to it, right? That's what the church is against, because the church is in favor of bringing about new life in the way that God designed it to be brought about. There's a very special gift and blessing that comes to the world when new life is brought about in that way. And it's the only way that new life should be brought into the world. Ask anybody if they want to be brought into the world without their mom and dad being married, or if they want to be brought into the world by someone other than their mom and dad, or if they want to be brought into the world and deprived of one of their parents, or whatever else. No one wants those things. Look at it from the perspective of the child, and suddenly you'll start to see why sex needs to be together with natural marriage, right? That's the first thing. So the church isn't anti-gay, it's against anything that's contrary to God's plan for love and marriage, okay? And that includes fornication, contraception, all those other things. So homosexual acts is just one of those many things, okay? What's another thing? Here's some simple questions that you can ask people when they come to you asking about homosexuality and same-sex, what they call marriages. Do a father and mother add anything to a family or not? Is a mother completely expendable and adds nothing unique or important to a family? Do we think that? Because if you think that it's just as good to have a father and a man and a man, instead of a father and a mother, you've essentially said the mother's role is completely dispensable, and she has nothing to contribute that a man can't contribute. Or do you think that a father's role in the family is completely useless and he can be completely dispensed with? Because if you hold that a woman and a woman do just as good as a man and his wife, then you're saying a father's role is completely useless. He has nothing to contribute that's essential or unique to a family. Is that really what you want to hold? Remember, if you're in favor of same-sex marriage, it means you have to hold that fathers and mothers are essentially useless. You're forced into that position because you're saying they can just be easily replaced by someone else and it makes no difference. I don't think that's right. And I don't think a reasonable person thinks that's right. And I don't think any child wants to be raised without their father or mother. It's not right. So that's one point. What's another point? Go back to the usual stock argument that's always given in favor of homosexual actions and homosexual marriage. How would you like it if you couldn't marry the person you loved? What about a very simple question before that? Are all loves sufficient to justify marriage? Every love? Can a man's love for his daughter justify marriage? Can a man's love for his son justify marriage? No. Some loves are disordered. A man's love for his alcohol, or when a married man loves another woman other than his wife, or whatever. It's clear all sorts of loves are disordered. It's not enough to say, how would you like it if you couldn't marry the person you loved? Because there's all sorts of loves that are disordered. And that's the question you have to answer first. What makes love reasonable and well-ordered? And what kind of love is not reasonable and not well-ordered? I can't think of a more disordered kind of love than sexual love, to do a reproductive act with someone who you can't reproduce with in principle. There's no even possibility of reproduction. That's completely disordered. It's unreasonable. Really, you want to have a reproductive act with a person of the same gender? It doesn't make any sense. Like I said, certainly makes less sense than a man wanting to have having sexual love for his daughter, because at least the sexual part still works, right? I mean, it's disordered because those are two mixed relationships, but at least there's a possibility of reproduction there, right? So that love isn't reasonable. Now, a lot of people will say, but Father, the church allows infertile couples to marry, so it's not about reproduction. That is a really obvious, what's called a sophism, and it's really easy to undo. Let me give you another parallel here and just sort of expose that argument for what it is. Let's say I have a cat at home, and my cat is unable to have kittens. It's an infertile cat. And then I also have an orange tree. And my orange tree, interestingly enough, is also unable to have kittens. Do I mean the same thing by the word unable there? Not even close. Right? An infertile cat is unable to have kittens because it's got an impeded natural ability. An orange tree is unable to have cats because it doesn't have any ability, natural or otherwise. So when I say that an infertile couple is unable to have children, I mean they have an impeded natural ability to have children. There's nothing wrong with them trying. It's just that nature is they've got an impediment somewhere. There's nothing wrong with them. They both have the natural ability that's impeded. But when a man and a man or a woman and a woman do a reproductive act, they might as well be orange trees having kittens. There's no ability whatsoever there. So the word ability is used equivocally. It's a complete equivocation. And so it's easy to see through that argument. There's no real argument there. So that's a completely different case. An infertile couple is a completely different case than a man and a man or a woman and a woman. Same-sex unions is in no way analogous to an infertile couple. And so all those different arguments, I bet you most of you have never even heard those arguments against same-sex marriage or same-sex unions before, because you're not allowed to in our culture. In our culture, you know what you get? It's against my religion. That's why I'm not for it. It's just people saying it's against my faith. I haven't used one argument from the Bible. None of these arguments, this whole thing about same-sex marriage, it's not about our faith. Jesus doesn't talk about it because it's so fundamental. It's just everybody knows, and every culture in all of human history has known that this is an unreasonable thing. Not that it's against our faith. It's just too basic to be against anyone's faith. It's just against reason. So that's how we have to attack it. It's not a Christian thing. It's just a reason thing. And we have to just realize God has made our body with purposes. I ask you, what are eyes for? And you say, for seeing. And what are your ears for? They're for hearing. What's your digestive system for? It's for digesting. If I try and eat steel wool or glass or ball bearings, do you think I'd be a little weird? I think so. But suddenly when I use my reproductive organs for something other than reproduction, suddenly I'm normal. It's obvious. Eyes are for seeing, reproductive systems are for reproducing. Every medical textbook will tell you that. It's obvious that that's what they're for. If I try to eat with my eyes, I'm weird. I'm disordered. I have a disordered desire. If I try and digest things that I have no natural ability to digest, I'm disordered. If I try and use my reproductive organs in a way that there's no natural ability for reproduction, that's a disordered desire. That's not reasonable. And we can't live our life irrationally. That's just like being insane. To go around saying that our bodily organs have no purposes, or we just give them purposes, that's not sanity. And no culture can survive in that kind of situation. So all of this stuff about same-sex marriage and homosexuality, it's just about a reasonable look at the world that everyone knows. And as far as I can tell, the only reason why people are in favor of it is because they've been listening to the television and the radio. As far as I can tell, that's the only reason. So, I don't know, that was kind of prolix, but there you go. Yeah, you have a question about that. It's good
well,
to...
just like maybe you could make a distinction between disordered in like a psychological sense as opposed to teleologically.
Okay, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Just because when they think disorder, it's probably like more psychological, so they're thinking.
Okay, yeah, sometimes I get people, especially teenagers or young people, say, but I know lots of people who have same-sex attraction, they're good people or whatever else, and it offends me that you tell me they're disordered. Well, first of all, I'm going to give you news. There's something called original sin, and that means we're all disordered. So I'm not accusing anyone of being disordered in such a way like you are just evil or something like that. We all have disorders, especially in particular sexual disorders. All of us have that because of original sin. Every man that I know of who's married still, interestingly, finds himself attracted to beautiful young women who are not his wife. Every single one of them. Nevertheless, he resists that disordered temptation if he's a good man. All of us have to resist those things, right? Every woman is going to have some disordered inclinations on her part as well, as a result of original sin. Disorder there just means not reasonable. In other words, if I were to act or choose according to my emotional inclination, it would not make me happy. It couldn't make me happy, okay? So there's that level of disorder. It's a moral disorder, or at least capable of bringing about sin, okay, if you choose it. A homosexual act is disordered at that level first. Then there's also what you refer to as a teleological disorder. In other words, it's just a speculative statement. Someone could have this disorder when they think that it's okay to do a reproductive act with someone that in principle you can't reproduce with, right? And they might not have the desire for it themselves, but anyone who thinks that eyes are not for seeing, or that in principle that your digestive system is not for digesting, or that reproductive organs are not for reproducing, anyone who thinks that has a disorder. Even if they don't have a desire for it themselves, they have a disorder in their own mind that they're not seeing reality correctly. I mean, reality is what it is. If you try and eat ball bearings your whole life, eventually there's going to be negative ramifications for that in your health. If you try and use your reproductive organs in a way that doesn't involve reproduction, eventually there are going to be negative ramifications for your life, okay? It'll come out. Remember this, reproduction is common not only to our species, all human beings have the ability or the inclination to reproduce, not only to our genus, all animals do this, even to our remote genus, all living things reproduce. That's what differentiates living things from non-living things. This is an extremely fundamental natural inclination. Don't think that if you mess this up, other things don't go with it. Right? You don't throw out this inclination and just sort of change it and alter it and think that nothing else, everything else just stays the same and you're wonderful people. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So it's a really fundamental inclination, and therefore it's a very fundamental disorder that causes great harm at the personal level and at the societal level. So, okay? Good.
Sorry, I have another question.
Oh, yes, please.
How can we support our friends that have same-sex attractions or identify as being gay or even identify as being transgendered or any of those things without encouraging same-sex relationships? Or
Yeah, good. No, that's good, because it is important to notice that most people who have these inclinations, it's not as a result of choice. Some are. Some are. I mean, as a priest, I know from my experience that sometimes it's just a result of people, they have a point in their life when they start choosing to do that, and then they acquire the inclination. But most, I think, I'm convinced, have it before they're making moral choices. Okay, so that's the first thing. And the question is, how do we support them? you know, the first premise is you hate the sin, not the sinner, number one. You got to love them, and you got to love their salvation. But supporting them does not mean encouraging their feelings or their emotions. And it's really important to explain to them that their identity is not homosexual. That is part of the propaganda that's out there. Everyone talks about you have a homosexual identity, or that's who you are or what you are. You know, we don't go around saying, for example, I told you before, most men are inclined to be attracted to women other than their wives. We don't go around calling them adulterers by their identity. They have an adulterous identity. You know, these disorders are just what they are. They're just disorders, they're inclinations. And it's really important to help people see, no, your identity is a man. You're a man, you're a woman. That's your identity sexually. You have inclinations to actions that aren't reasonable, and the only way that you're going to find peace and joy in your soul is if you recognize that they're disordered, and then you try and live contrary to that. Now, in some cases, that means living celibate your whole life. And it's hard for people to do that unless they have the faith, you know. But, you know, I always tell people, look, I chose to be celibate my whole life. I'd love to be married. I'd love to have kids. I'd love to have a wife. But as a result of the grace of Christ, I'm not living for this world. I'm not living for sexual pleasure. I'm not looking for the goods of the body. I see there's a life beyond this life. And for some people, I think that's the only way they'll ever be free, truly free, from being a slave to their sexual desires. Because I tell you something, our society has basically made the argument that sex trumps everything. You can never expect someone to go without sex. And I challenge that. And Jesus Christ challenges that. That is not the truth. Sex will not set you free. It will not make you happy. And you don't need sex to be happy. So you need to really be aware of that yourself and to preach that as part of the good news in the gospel. I think about that woman, the Samaritan woman, who had 5 husbands and the man she was with wasn't her husband. She thought she needed sex to be happy. She didn't need sex to be happy. Okay? So the first thing you need to impress upon people is your identity is not your sexual disorder, and you don't need sex to be happy. You're a human being with human dignity. You're a man, you're a woman, and you're made for greater things. You're made to see God face to face. This is the life that you're meant to have. And as a priest, I can guarantee you that this works. I've seen many cases of people who have come in and they've decided that they want to live their life. They just say, Father, I just want to live according to my desires and see how that works out for me. And it is always a train wreck. Always a train wreck. And on the other hand, I've seen a lot of young people, especially young men who have come in. They had same-sex attraction. And we talked it through, and I told them the things that I'm telling you. I said, you can't be happy if you try this. It's just like, you know, it's not how you're made. You can't be happy if you keep on following this. And they understand that. So they say, what do I do, Father? I say, okay, look, first of all, you got to live on the life of the Spirit. And you got to make that your first choice and what you're striving for. Then, at the same time, you can work to heal those difficulties in your relationships. I tell you, the same-sex relationship problems, it's really a friendship problem. Usually it has to do with men with the dad. Women, it can be a little bit more complicated, but usually, in nearly every case when a young man has same-sex attraction, he has a problem with his relationship with his father, and he needs to have a father who loves him to come in, whether it's his own father or someone else who acts as a father, so he can experience a fatherly love and also real affirming male friendship. That's really what he's looking for. He's not looking for sex. Once he finds those things, and at the same time is trying to live the life of the Spirit and the mind, these men, they find great peace and joy. I know a lot of cases of young men who have successfully lived their life seeking the higher things, the right things, and they approach their same-sex attraction in the right way, in a healthy way, not you know, in a scrupulous way, and not with constantly being afraid of things, but just, you know, coming once again for forgiveness, seeking to do the right thing, and eventually they grow to have a certain masculine maturity about them, and a lot of them are able to, you know, date girls. They start to feel attracted to them, enjoy being around them. The possibility of marriage is there. It really works. It really happens.